What if Victorian England had airships, bulletproof corsets, and a clandestine organization that manages all of the British Empire's most peculiar occurrences? What if that was tied all together in a well-polished manuscript with a beautifully executed subplot and an errorless print run? Well, you'd have half of this month's book. Let's talk about how Phoenix Rising fails to escape its own flames, how a cleverly written duo almost pulls it from the ashes, and why I just can't give up on it after the typewriter. Phoenix Rising was released as the first in a 6-book series in 2011. It wound up taking the number 8 spot on Goodreads' Best Science Fiction list that year, and took home the Airship Award for Best Written Steampunk. I was first introduced to the writings of Tee and Pip through their individual audiobook works. I liked their stuff so much I followed them on social media and was around when they announced the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences. I wound up especially hyped for this book's release, not only because I enjoy steampunk, but because they teased it really well. They released a companion podcast ahead of the book, Tales from the Archives, which itself saw 4 volumes and eventual release in book form. Tales is a collection of short stories written by the original authors, as well as guest authors, all set in the world of the Ministry. A lot of the throwaway references in Phoenix Rising, other agents, old cases, mysterious happenings, those are all expanded on in these shorts, including one that details why Eliza had to leave New Zealand. But why is Eliza from New Zealand in the first place? Probably because that's where Pip is from. Phillipa Ballantine is from Wellington, New Zealand, where she attended the Victoria University of Wellington before becoming the first Kiwi author to podcast a novel in 2006, which I would stumble on later. Sometime after that, she moved to the US, where she married her writing partner on this novel, T. Morris. Around the same time they started releasing the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences, Pip's series The Books of the Order were published by Ace Books. And in more recent times, she has written books for the Aliens franchise and is currently writing the serialized fiction The Illuminal's Daughters and The Witchwood Sisters, available on Vella and her Patreon. T's works include Moravi, The Chronicles of Rafe and Ascana, and Billibub Battings in the Case of the Singing Sword. T was the first person to release a novel to podcast in its entirety back in 2005. Yes, podcasts are that old, and no, they were not invented by Joe Rogan. This led to the founding of Audiobooks.com, a haven for free audiobooks and an outlet for many authors' works. It also led to T co-authoring Podcasting for Dummies with Evo Terra and set T's writing career on a more non-fiction bent, writing articles for Farscape Forever, Sex, Drugs, and Killer Muppets, and So Say We All, collected thoughts and opinions of Battlestar Galactica, as well as All a Twitter, a definitive guide to the now maligned but once beloved social media platform. The Ministry books served as a return to fiction for T, though since their run, he and Pip have collaborated on social media for writers, as well as his return for the 3rd edition of Podcasting for Dummies. Tee and Pip are 2 of the authors most responsible for Wooks books. There are others to blame as well, but because of the creation of Audiobooks.com, now Scribble, I stumbled on a plethora of free audiobooks that inspired me to write and explore new ideas. More importantly, it opened my eyes to non-traditional publication means. That meant maybe one day my stories might have a chance. That realization was 15 years ago, and I'm only now taking a chance on it. But Phillipa Ballantine and T. Morris are 2 people I look to in a those who went before me sort of way. In Phoenix Rising, we follow the adventures of Eliza Braun, a field agent in Britain's Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences, and Wellington Books, the Ministry's archivist. After failing to follow orders during a mission to rescue the Ministry's chief and only archivist, Agent Braun is sentenced to serving with the stuffy British gentleman in the organization's archives, where the documentation, artifacts, and history of the Ministry's many cases go to be filed away. For the fastidious books, the archive is a paradise, full of things to study, catalog, and organize, including a massive steam-powered computer of his own design. But for the TNT-loving, knife-throwing field agent Eliza, it's hell. It just is. After stumbling on the abandoned files of her former partner's last case, discarded in the unsolved mysteries corner of the giant library, Eliza dedicates herself to finishing what he started, with or without permission from the head of the ministry. As for books, well, of course, she drags him along on the crazy ride across London. Books and Braun wind up uncovering a plot to upend the British Empire, involving evil doctors, stuck-up lords, and Eliza's own rendition of the climax of Verdi's Macbeth, complete with actual stabbings. All before the halfway point of the story. The second half of the book puts us in the belly of the beast, among the mysterious Phoenix Society for a twisted weekend of initiation testing, hunting, and doom. Consisting mostly of orgies, mechanical men, and a manic escape made possible by the daring duo of Books and Braun. Going into Phoenix Rising, I had a few expectations. First off, I was hoping for a solid hit of steampunk. I'm talking steam-powered tech, gear-driven gadgets, the works. Some of which we got in Welly's gadgets, and weaponry mostly from the villains. But as far as the world as a whole, what I got was more steampunk filler. A handful of steampunk croutons sprinkled throughout the story, but the world outside the ministry never felt fundamentally changed by the technology. Even when comparing the book to the tales from the archives, this felt surprisingly light on the steam. The takeaway quote from the back of the book, "Londoners are vanishing, then reappearing, washing up as corpses on the banks of the Thames, drained of blood and bone," implied something supernatural to me. I was expecting us to run up against vampires or some kind of monster menace, but we got a different, more mechanical twist in the end. Not that it really mattered. The dead bodies, and indeed that entire portion of the book, was just a disposable MacGuffin in the end, and met no real satisfying payoff. Yes, it kicks off the investigation like a good MacGuffin should, but the result in the final confrontation is so disconnected and underplayed, I had to reread the paragraph to make the connection back to the start of the story. It's almost blink and you miss it. That said, the campy, tongue-in-cheek tone, absolutely nailed. I mean, the leads are named Books and Braun. How could this not just be a romp? And a romp it was. In the right places, it was quick-paced, adventure-filled, and full of cheeky banter. London felt alive in the pockets of it we got to see, and most of the supporting cast did as well. The banter and growing relationship between the unexpected partnership was easily one of the strongest elements. Their dynamic is charming, tense, and full of energy, but it does escalate quickly. I mean, I was expecting some flirtation between Eliza and Wellington, and that definitely happened. But what I wasn't expecting was just how fast things got intense. We went from witty banter to pinned against the wall and inspiring thoughts within a chapter or two of teaming up. The sudden spike in sexual tension caught me a bit off guard, and I know this scene I am referencing, in the alley after they leave Bedlam, was less romance and more tactful, but it was still a sudden escalation on Eliza's part that I wasn't expecting, and I think Books felt the same way. That brings us to Eliza's weaponization of her sexuality. I don't have a problem with a confident character using charm or seduction to their advantage. I've known both men and women who do this in real life, but in Eliza's case it started to get a bit repetitive. Flash some cleavage or punch someone. It seems to be like 90% of her toolkit. And even though it's a trope in these kinds of pulp stories, I thought it was a little over the top. But not disturbing by any means. That was until we actually met the Phoenix Society. Looking back over the first half of the story, after getting a full look into the Phoenix Society's misogyny, things get more complicated. The forced orgy, the outright detestable treatment of women. I'm not complaining about the villains doing villainous things. They are evil and exploitative, and this is one of the ways we are being shown that. It's just that the book starts out with playful seduction and then pivots hard into disturbing chauvinism, and suddenly some of Eliza's earlier actions feel less empowering and more uncomfortable. There's also a wider discussion that could be had about the strong, kick-ass feminist character that then gets undercut by over-sexualization. Even though for the most part it is Eliza choosing to act this way, she still sometimes feels like she was written into that stereotype without full awareness of the implications. I also just want to briefly touch on Books' earlier trauma centered around women. He says a couple of times that his experience of being captured by the first woman that had shown him interest in some time was kind of messing with his head, and Eliza still plays her little games with him, and that made me a bit uncomfortable at times. But hey, that's alright, because by the midpoint of the book, it's no longer a problem. Like, he's healed of it, and it doesn't come up again. Even after Sophia is revealed to not only be the society's assassin, but also the woman who seduced him for the House of Usher. This initial trauma is not mentioned again. And while we are discussing issues, is it just me, or does the book also have too many villains? At one point or another, we're dealing with the House of Usher, the evil doctor whose name I barely remember because it ultimately didn't matter, the Phoenix Society. But wait, never mind. Here comes that House of Usher again. Just right there at the end. Just here it is. Add to that Sophia Del Morte and a tacked-on Ministry sabotage subplot, and it all gets a little muddled. And that subplot? It didn't need to be in book one. We're settling into this world, and the Ministry with it. Just the opening scene with Dr. Sound, where the Ministry is being threatened by Lord Von I Know the Queen, was enough. I didn't need interludes that pulled away from the main story, grinding the pace to a halt. The story just suffered for it. Then there's the journey to the climax. The evil doctor and Nurse Mary added very little, and the detour to deal with them felt like busy work. We could have streamlined the whole thing, maybe cut straight from Bedlam to the opera, or combined the explosion at the doctor's office with the Foundry visit, and made it more impactful. As it stands, the Foundry never gets a meaningful payoff. Yes, it's where the bad guys sourced their equipment, but the tieback was so weak it might as well not have happened. The climax had some cool ideas, but some shaky execution. Let's start with the journal bomb. I like the concept. A book that becomes a deadlier weapon the more you add to it is very fitting for Wellington books. But really? A journal-sized explosive takes down the entire secret underground facility? Then the escape from the manor section dragged on, but with very little tension? So instead of the grinding energy that keeps us on the edge of our seats at every turn, it just felt like the story was delaying itself to give us, I don't know what. And while Books gets to shine in other ways throughout the story, we finally learn he's a bit of a badass with a gun, but even that felt just checked off a list. He stops, handles a problem, then moves on, like it's a QuickTime event from an old video game. Meanwhile, Eliza gets sidelined. After being a co-lead the whole book, she's knocked out and wakes up when everything is over. No final duel with Sophia. No big moment to cap off her arc. It's a letdown. And Sophia herself, the badass female assassin counter to Eliza and her dynamite, total anticlimax. She escapes in an epilogue tease with absolutely no impact on the end of the story, curled up in a corner watching the manor fall down around her. Ironically, Olivia Devane, the wife of the second in command of the society, gets the strongest ending. She shoots her abusive husband in the head. She gets the vengeance the oppressed wives all deserve, and then she takes her own life. It's tragic, but it lands emotionally, and honestly, it's more powerful than anything Sophia does after we arrive at the manor. Now, I've said a lot about what's wrong with this book, but let's not ignore the highlights. Eliza and Willie's banter is top-notch. Their chemistry carries much of the book. The action scenes, especially the opera fight, are kinetic and fun. Agent Bruce Campbell, the Thunder from Down Under, despite his relegation to the interludes, is a bit of a wild card, but he works. And despite all my complaining, I want you to understand I enjoyed this book. It's very easy for me to list things I saw wrong, but very difficult for me to tell you why I liked a thing. I just kind of do. I enjoyed Phoenix Rising despite the issues I listed above, and in a way it's both in spite of and because of the final issue, the editing. There are editing errors all over this book. In my paperback edition, the first paragraph of chapter 1 is printed twice, just repeats. Later on, there are formatting problems like the name of a chapter being misaligned. The name of the reporter Eliza meets in the Havelock mansion. She just knows it without being told. It's Molly. The numbering for the Mecha Men generations, specifically the Mark I and Mark II, don't make sense with what's said about their design, and it seems to be inconsistent. There's a few confusing moments where things don't quite add up. Like in the coach chase scene, I got confused whose hand was doing what at one point. Was it Wellington or the mystery writers? Who it turns out worked for the House of Usher, by the way, just in case you missed it in Sophia's final interlude. All of these issues seem like the kind of things two authors and a professional editor, because Phoenix Rising was originally published by Harper Voyager, should have caught. And they probably would have, had it got its final round of edits. A Goodreads reviewer by the name of Mike pointed out some of these problems in his review of the book. Now, according to him, he reached out to Tee through the comments section on his blog about the issues, and Tee responded that due to time constraints, they missed a round of edits. Whether that's Tee and Pip's fault or Harper Voyager's fault, I have no idea. As a matter of fact, I couldn't even corroborate Mike's claim, because in the 13 years since Mike wrote his review, Tee has disabled comments on his blog. But the claim makes sense to me. As I said, I've read other Tee and Pip works, and they were executed better. I know these two authors can do better, which makes it all the more disappointing to finally read this after 15 years of it being on my to-read list. And honestly, it's a bit embarrassing to have recommended this as a place to start with their works, not because this is horrible. I know if they had gotten in that last round of edits, this book would have been sterling. I bet the sequel, The Janice Affair, which was also award-winning, is even better. But I can't say because I haven't read it. I will recommend, if you want to give Tee and Pip another chance without moving on to the second book, that you check out the tales from the archives. Seek out the ones written by Tee and Pip, like Darkest Before the Dark Water by Tee and What Befell Samson by Pip. Or I'll link to Billibub Battings in the Case of the Singing Sword audiobook by Tee in the description. It's still a free podcast and is available on Pocket Casts. I couldn't find it on Apple. The link is for podbay.fm. And for Phillipa, I'll recommend Chasing the Bard. It looks like the free podcast of the audiobook has been taken down, so I'll link to the book on Amazon. But if you'd rather have the audiobook, it's of great quality. It's read by the author and is on Audible. As for my final score for Phoenix Rising, I want to give it 5 stars for what it could have been. But as it sits without those final edits, 3 stars. With that behind us, let's talk about another novel I haven't read by a favorite author from my younger years, and hopefully it won't disappoint. Red Planet is a 1949 novel by sci-fi master Robert A. Heinlein. Originally published as part of the Heinlein Juveniles, a series of novels written for Scribner's young adult line, after significant changes were forced on the author by the publisher. After his death, Del Rey Books reissued the novel as Heinlein originally intended, and this is the edition we will be reading. But what is the book about? Heinlein's iconic Red Planet tells the story of Jim Marlowe and Frank Sutton's journey to the Low Academy boarding school on Mars, and the discoveries they make there that impact the future of their entire colony. While on their way, along with Jim's volleyball-sized native pet Willis the Bouncer, the boys wander into the Forbidden Territory, where they meet a native Martian. The Martian, who is oddly protective of Willis, becomes a water friend to the young boys, and exposes them to the true wonders of the planet. Once enrolled at the school, Jim and Frank rescue Willis from the authoritarian headmaster who had confiscated the pet, and discover the colonial administrator's plans for Mars, which threatens the very survival of the colony in its present form. Jim and Frank run away from the school. Can they warn the colony in time to save it from the administrator's nefarious plans? Now, as best as I can tell, both edits of this book are still available out there, and as I said, it's my intention to read the restored version. If you read the original Scribner edits from '49, that should still be fine. From what I understand, the plot isn't too significantly different, but if what we wind up discussing come the end of July is a little off from what you read, then that will probably be why. Amazon has this one in the usual: Kindle, paperback, audio, and hardcover. According to some of the reviews, this version, linked in the description, is the restored version that was published after Heinlein's death. Kobo also has it in ebook and audiobook form. The website flat out says it's the restored version of the book. Barnes & Noble doesn't say either way, but the ISBN is the same as Amazon's for the paperback. Books A Million says it has the restored ending, which I assume means it's the restored edition, but it also has the same ISBN for the paperback as Amazon and Barnes & Noble. They're all linked in the description, and I am sure you can cross-reference the ISBN to Libby, Hoopla, or your local library to make sure you have the same edition I will be reading. I'll even bet if you ask the right person at your favorite local bookshop, they might be able to help you out. So don't forget to try there too. Is this your first rodeo with us in the book club? Then check out this, last month's video on Jade City. Want to tear apart someone else's writing the way I did Tee and Pip? Why not mine? Here's the link to the Liam of Carcan playlist. And of course, there's always the subscribe button, so you can follow along with us next month. But until then, why not go enjoy a book?